I was standing in the parking lot of our church when my phone buzzed. The service wasn't over yet. I could still hear the choir inside, that familiar low hum bleeding through the old wooden doors. I had stepped out because my heels were killing me, and I needed air, just 2 minutes of quiet before going back in. I was thinking about nothing. About lunch, maybe. About whether I'd remembered to turn off the coffee maker. Then my phone buzzed again. It was my husband's best friend, the man who had been in our wedding, the man who carried my husband's casket 8 months ago. I almost didn't answer. Claire. His voice was strange, flat and tight at the same time, the way someone sounds when they're trying very hard to hold something together. You need to come home, right now. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. What? Marcus, what's wrong? Is something on fire, is it? Nothing's on fire. Just come home. And come alone. A pause. Please don't bring your mother. Don't bring anyone. He hung up. I stood there in the parking lot for a moment, the sun warm on my face, completely still. The choir finished their song. I heard applause from inside. I got in my car and drove home. My husband, Daniel, had been gone for 8 months. A heart attack, they said. 41 years old, no prior history, no warning. He was here on a Tuesday and gone by Wednesday morning, and the world just kept moving like nothing had split open down the middle of it. We had been married for 6 years. We didn't have children yet. We were still trying, still hopeful, still in that quiet space between wanting and having. He ran a small logistics company out of the house, just him and 2 employees and a whole lot of spreadsheets. I worked as a physical therapist at a clinic 20 minutes away. We were ordinary. We were happy. I thought I knew everything about our life. Marcus had been Daniel's best friend since college. He was the kind of man who showed up, who helped us move into this house, who fixed our back gate when it broke, who sat with me in the hospital waiting room for 4 hours that Wednesday morning until the doctor came out with that look on his face. He had been one of the few people who kept checking on me after the funeral, when everyone else gradually, gently, disappeared back into their own lives. I trusted him completely. I pulled into the driveway and he was standing on the front porch, his hand shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked pale. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Tell me what's happening," I said before I even reached the steps. He held the door open and said, "Come inside first." He had been doing me a favor. That was how it started. After Daniel died, I couldn't bring myself to go through the home office. It was a small room off the hallway, just a desk and 2 filing cabinets and a closet where Daniel kept old tax documents and contracts. I had closed the door in October and simply never opened it again. Every time I walked past it, I found something else to look at. Last week, I had finally asked Marcus if he would help me sort through it, not to throw anything away, just to organize, to understand what was there so I could hand everything properly to the accountant. He said, of course. He said he would come Saturday morning. He'd been in there for 2 hours when he found it. He walked me to the office doorway and pointed to the closet. The back panel, the one that looked like ordinary drywall, was sitting at an angle, slightly separated from the wall. He had knocked against it reaching for a box, and it had moved. When he looked closer, he found that it wasn't attached. It was a removable panel, maybe 18 inches wide, tucked so seamlessly into the corner that you would never notice unless you were right up against it. Behind it was a metal box, bolted to the actual wall stud. Not a safe with a combination dial, just a plain, flat metal document box with a simple key lock. The key was taped to the inside of the panel itself on a small strip of masking tape with Daniel's handwriting on it. For Claire. Only Claire. My hands weren't entirely steady when I took the key. "I haven't opened it," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't touch anything after I found the note." I looked at him. He looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Worried, yes, but something underneath the worry. Something careful. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. He shook his head, but his jaw tightened just slightly, and I filed that away. I waited until he left before I opened it. Inside the box were 3 things: a USB drive, a small spiral notebook filled with Daniel's handwriting and a sealed envelope with my name on the front. I sat on the floor of the office for a long time before I opened the envelope. Claire, if you're reading this, then something happened to me before I could figure out how to say this out loud. I'm sorry for that. I should have told you sooner. I kept thinking I needed more proof before I brought it to you, and then I kept thinking I needed a little more. And I kept waiting. The business has been losing money that I can't account for. Not a little, a significant amount, over almost 2 years. I've been tracking it in the notebook. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing because of who it points to. Everything I found is on the drive. I was going to take it to an attorney. I was going to fix it first and then tell you. I love you. I'm sorry I waited. Daniel, I read it twice. Then I sat very still on the floor of that office and listened to the house settle around me, the familiar creaks and sighs of it, and I thought about the fact that my husband had been afraid of something and had never told me, and that he had died, and that I had spent 8 months grieving him without knowing any of this. Then I got up and put the notebook, the drive, and the letter back in the box. I locked it. I put the key in my coat pocket, and I called an attorney. Her name was Patricia Osei, and a colleague at my clinic had used her for an estate matter 2 years ago and said she was sharp and didn't waste her time. I called her Monday morning and had an appointment by Tuesday afternoon. I brought the box. She read the letter. She looked at the notebook, page by page, without speaking. She was quiet for a long time. "Have you looked at the drive yet?" she asked. I said no. I had been afraid to. She had an IT person come in right there, and we plugged it into a laptop in her conference room, and the 3 of us sat together and looked at what my husband had spent almost 2 years quietly documenting. It was financial records, transfers, invoices, vendor payments, a careful, methodical record of money leaving Daniel's business account in patterns that didn't match any legitimate expense. Small amounts at first, 300 here, 500 there, the kind of numbers that might get lost in normal bookkeeping noise. Then larger still. Over 22 months, just under $90,000, every transfer traced back to the same secondary account. An account that, according to the documents Daniel had flagged, was connected to a business entity registered in another state, a shell company with a name that meant nothing on the surface. But Daniel had kept digging. And in the notebook, in his careful handwriting, he had written down every step of what he found. He had traced that shell company back to its registered agent, and the registered agent's address was a house I recognized immediately. It was the house where my husband's business partner lived. His name was Kevin. He and Daniel had started the company together 7 years ago, before Daniel and I were even married. He had been at our wedding. He had been at a funeral. He had called me twice in the months after, just to check in, he said, just to see how I was holding up. I thought about those phone calls now and felt something cold move through my chest. Patricia set the laptop aside and folded her hands on the table. "Your husband built a very thorough case," she said. "This is enough to begin with, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." She paused. "Does Kevin know you found this?" I said no. "Does anyone know?" I thought about Marcus, the way his jaw had tightened, the something careful underneath his worry. "I don't know," I said honestly. She nodded slowly. "Then we move carefully. You don't contact Kevin. You don't mention this to anyone. Not your mother, not your friends, not Marcus, not yet. Can you do that?" I said yes. I meant it. What came next was 6 weeks of the most exhausting patience I have ever practiced. Patricia's team pulled financial records, cross-referenced everything in Daniel's notebook, and built a timeline. The transfers had started approximately 3 months after Daniel and Kevin restructured their partnership agreement, a restructuring that, Patricia discovered, had given Kevin slightly broader access to the business accounts than Daniel had realized at the time. A small thing. An oversight. The kind of thing you don't notice when you trust someone. Kevin had noticed immediately. He had been careful. That was the thing that kept sitting in my stomach like a stone, how careful he had been. He hadn't taken in large, obvious chunks. He had been patient and methodical and slow, the way someone is when they have calculated exactly how long they can go undetected. If Daniel hadn't been doing his own quiet audit, if he hadn't had the instinct to look, it might have gone on indefinitely. The shell company had been used to pay invoices for services that were never rendered, vendors that didn't exist, at least not in any operational sense, paperwork that looked legitimate on the surface but dissolved under scrutiny. Patricia also found something else. The partnership restructuring agreement, the one that had given Kevin that broader account access, had been notarized. But when Patricia had a document examiner look at it, the examiner noted inconsistencies in the signature block. The notary stamp matched a legitimate notary whose records showed she had never processed a document for Daniel's company. Daniel's signature had been forged. He had signed a version of that agreement, but not that version. Somewhere between the copy Daniel had signed and the copy that went on record, the document had been altered. Quietly, surgically, to give Kevin access Daniel had never actually agreed to. When Patricia explained this to me, I was sitting in her office with my hands in my lap, and I had to remind myself to breathe, because this meant that Kevin hadn't just been opportunistic. He had planned this. He had set the conditions before he ever took the first dollar. He forged my husband's signature, I said. It wasn't a question. That's what the evidence indicates, Patricia said, which means we're not looking at embezzlement alone. We're looking at forgery, fraud, potentially more depending on what else we find. I drove home that evening and sat in the kitchen for a long time in the dark. I thought about Daniel sitting at that desk, in that little office, going through his records alone, realizing slowly what was happening, writing it all down, page by page, building his case, taping that key inside the wall panel, writing me a letter he never sent. He had been scared to believe it, he'd said, because of who it pointed to. A man he had known for 15 years. A man he had built something with. I understood that fear. I had been carrying a version of it myself, these last 6 weeks. The fear of what it means when someone you trusted completely turns out to have been something else entirely. I still hadn't said anything to Marcus. But Marcus called me. It was a Thursday evening, about 5 weeks in, and he asked if he could come over. He said he wanted to check in. He said he'd been thinking about me. I said, sure, come over, and I made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I watched him very carefully. He was nervous. Not the nervous of someone with bad news, the nervous of someone deciding whether to say something. I waited. About 20 minutes in, he set down his mug and said, Claire, I need to tell you something. I kept my face neutral. Okay. I think he stopped. Started again. I think you should look more carefully at the business finances. I think there might be something wrong. What makes you say that? I said quietly. He looked at his hands. Daniel said something to me, about 6 weeks before he died. He said he'd been going through the books and something wasn't adding up, and he didn't want to say more until he was sure. He said he was going to talk to a lawyer. He looked up. I should have said something sooner. After he died, I told myself maybe it was nothing. Maybe he'd figured it out. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I kept not saying it. He exhaled. I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long moment. Thank you for telling me, I said. I did not tell him what I already knew. Patricia had been clear, and I had learned enough by then to understand that the value of what I had was in its containment. I would not let it scatter. But I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Not relief exactly. Something smaller and more specific. The feeling of a piece clicking into place. Patricia filed the civil suit on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Kevin had been served. He called me twice that day. I didn't answer. Patricia had told me not to, and I didn't need the instruction. I simply did not want to hear his voice. Not yet. Maybe not ever, in any context that wasn't a deposition. His attorney contacted Patricia within 48 hours. There was a brief, almost insulting period during which Kevin's legal team suggested that the financial irregularities were the result of bookkeeping errors, a miscommunication, an administrative oversight, nothing intentional. Patricia responded by sending them the document examiner's report on the forged signature. That ended the bookkeeping error theory rather quickly. What followed was 3 weeks of back and forth that Patricia handled and mostly shielded me from, which I was grateful for. I went to work. I did my sessions, I helped my patients, I drove home and made dinner and called my mother on Sundays and tried to sleep. I had told my mother there was a legal matter related to Daniel's business being resolved, and she had offered to come stay with me, and I had said no, I was fine. I would tell her more when it was finished. I was fine, I think, in the way that you are fine when you have something clear to do, when the path, however hard, is visible. Kevin agreed to a settlement. Full repayment of the $90,000 plus interest and legal fees, a formal dissolution of any remaining business interest, a clause acknowledging the forgery which Patricia had insisted on and which his team had fought hardest. In the end, they signed it. No criminal charges. That was the part I struggled with. Patricia had been honest with me about the calculus of it. Civil recovery was certain. Criminal prosecution was slower, more complicated, less predictable, and would extend this process by years. She did not tell me what to choose. She laid out both paths and let me sit with them. I thought about it for 4 days. I thought about Daniel in that office, alone with his notebook. I thought about Kevin at the funeral, his hand on my shoulder, saying if you need anything, anything at all. In the end, I chose the settlement. Not because I forgave him, not because I thought he didn't deserve worse, but because Daniel had spent the last months of his life trying to fix this quietly, and there was something in me that wanted to honor that, to finish what he started, cleanly, and then close the door. I would not let Kevin have another year of my life. The wire transfer cleared on a Thursday afternoon in late spring. Patricia called me and I was sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot after my last session, too tired to go in, too wound up to drive. She told me the amount, confirmed it had cleared, and said she would send me the final documents by end of day. I thanked her. I sat there for a while after we hung up. I thought about the woman I had been 8 months ago, standing in that parking lot outside the church, watching the choir finish their song, thinking about lunch. Not knowing that inside her house, behind a wall panel and a small home office, her husband had left her everything she would need. He had known me well enough to know I would find it. He had known me well enough to leave the key. I drove home. I made dinner. I called my mother, and this time I told her everything, and she cried a little, and I didn't, and she said Daniel would be so proud of you. And I said I know, Mom, and I meant it in a way that settled somewhere deep and stayed there. That night I went into the office, the room I had been afraid of for 8 months, and I sat at Daniel's desk and I opened the window and let the evening air come in. The box was still there. The notebook, the drive, the letter. I read the letter one more time. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in my coat pocket where it would stay. I looked around the room, the filing cabinets, the stacks of paper, the ordinary small life of a man who had been careful and thorough and had loved me enough to leave a trail. I had followed every step of it. I turned off the light and went to bed, and for the first time in 8 months, I slept all the way through the night.